Good morning, Mosaic. What a bittersweet breakfast this Sunday morning, September 26th. Bitter is how I would love to be with you. I wish it was safe for us to feel good about being in person. Sweet because I am just always really grateful to be back with you all, to be offering food for thought, opening a sacred conversation, and just participating with you. You're such an important and sweet group of people. I appreciate the invitation. So this morning, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts light the way, not only to hearing these words, but to put them into practice. I want us to think this morning about getting unstuck. I shared with Judy, I've been through quite a season myself. In the last 10 weeks, I've gone through a significant breakup of a relationship that was my really one significant relationship post-divorce. We're taking kids back to school in the middle of a pandemic. I am doing funerals for young friends who've died of COVID, and my older brother and his family were unvaccinated for their reasons, and their whole family got COVID. So it's been a heavy season, I think, to put it lightly. And I said to Judy and Tracy and the others that I felt like something I've been learning and I'd love to share is an invitation to getting unstuck, because I think that's a good word for how I felt. I think many of us have felt. And I think it's also an important word, not just for us individually, but for spiritual communities, coming out of the last 18 months, coming out of the election cycle before that, coming out of police violence and systemic racism. There's a sense of stuckness for spiritual communities, and scholars that study the way spiritual communities evolve say, seasonally, traditions, communities, practices will have to sort of clean out the garage, put everything in the driveway, and ask the question, what do we keep? What do we hang on to? And sort of the question of how do we get unstuck is the same question as how do we know what it is that's most important? What's essential? What do we hang on to when it feels like everything in the world has just been thrown up in the air? We're not sure what's going to land where. Everything in the garage has been emptied into the driveway, and we don't know what's going to come back in with us. What will be the new normal? So how do we move forward? How do we get unstuck? And I want to kind of frame it in three ways. I think the way that we get unstuck is, and I'm going to share these practices, is obviously more than that, but for today's sermon, an external call, an internal call, and a communal call, which is what we're doing together. So an external call is usually something that gets us moving. This is a catalytic call. An internal call usually gets us reflecting. Who am I? What do I want? And a communal call gets us connecting. Who am I with? Who are my people? Who am I on this journey with? And I'm going to explain this, but I want you to be paying attention to your own inner landscape. And we're going to ask, which of these do you need right now? Which of these do you need right now? Do you need to get moving? Do you maybe need to get unstuck? Do you maybe need to redefine yourself, take a risk, take a move, make a step without everything solved? You haven't got all the answers before you take a step. Or maybe you need to turn inward. Maybe you need to get introspective, spend some time in self-discovery. We can talk about that. And we'll assume we all need this a little more. You need to recognize the shape of your own loneliness, and whether or not, can you figure this out alone? And I think what we're saying is people who value spiritual community is that you can't, and you don't have to. We deeply need human mirrors to help us see ourselves. And we need human hands to help us hold this journey and the spirituality. So let's get moving and reflecting and connecting. And maybe you're thinking, let me pick a story that I think maybe we've heard of. Jesus calls disciples. He goes down by the sea. He calls them. They follow him. And he says some strange. He says, "Come follow me." They drop their nets, and he says, "I'll make you fishers of men," which is this crazy phrase. We don't know what it means. Jesus is talking about making these like followers and teaching them things. He calls them, and they follow. And apparently something happens, because even 2,000 years later, we're still telling these stories about fishermen being called by the sea in this tiny little backwater province of the Galilee in the ancient Near East. Why are we in the modern Western world? I'm telling this story via a video sermon. I mean, it's kind of crazy. So something happened, right? Jesus called disciples. These guys said, okay, we're interested in what you've got. We'll follow you. And something crazy happened. But I think what we sensationalize these stories because, A, they were written way after they really happened, and they were written not to capture historical accuracy like we would watch the news, but they had a theological agenda. They were trying to convince people about Jesus and about God. Okay, so let's just be honest about that. There's no bait and switch. These have an agenda. But sometimes when we hear a story like the calling of disciples, we treat that kind of faith like a completed painting, where our job is just to sort of look at it. We hear the story and then we just take it in. We discover what it means. Maybe we appreciate it. Go, oh, this is what that means. We come up with like a simple meaning for it. But in actuality, what if a story like this, what if the text is actually a canvas and we're invited to paint ourselves into it as we read it with our imagination? We're invited to imagine ourselves into a formative story. I mean, this is what we do every time we turn on the TV, right? This is Netflix. This is Amazon Prime. This is how we shape ourselves subconsciously. We imagine ourselves into a story. So what happened? What happened, and how can we paint ourselves with the palette of this kind of formation? What's happening? Not just what happened did Jesus call disciples by a sea. Painting ourselves into a text means asking the question, what is happening now? What's happening in me? What's happening here? What happens if, like, really simple stories like this, like Jesus calling disciples, what if these aren't just received by us? What if these are somehow alive in us? Because I think maybe the other way that we could put getting unstuck it is, I think, what Joseph Campbell calls the call to adventure. The call to adventure. And I think I got to say that for example, the story of the call to adventure, I think that's alive in me. And I think that's alive in everyone. And sometimes that feels like, depending on the season we're in, like the pandemic and the world falling apart, maybe that call to adventure feels like getting unstuck. But I think we all have some of that call to adventure. So let's start with that, the external move. The external call gets us moving, and it's very often the call to leave. This is a call that unsettles and dislocates. The external call makes us vulnerable. The external call says the way things have been contextually is not going to be that way anymore. We've got to move beyond that. So Jesus calls disciples and he says, you're going to go fish for people. If you're like me, that phrase is sort of Christianese, off-putting, confusing, unsettling. I never, in 20 years I've been in this profession, reading the Bible, studying, preaching. I didn't know that there was actually a callback from fishers of men to the Old Testament, to the prophet Jeremiah during the exile. And fishers of men is actually a callback to the people feeling far from home. They're in exile in Babylon. They're far from Jerusalem, which is not just where they're from. That's where God is. That's where the holy mountain is. That's where it's happening. So they're far from home. And you find this longing to be safe, to be settled, to be home, to be content. So in Jeremiah, the phrase fishers of men is stirring up apocalyptic hope for the changing of an age, for a great homecoming, that everyone can come home. So when Jesus says, I'm going to make you fish for people, he's talking about empowering deputies in the great homecoming. He's saying everyone is about to come home to themselves, to God, to their neighbor. This great homecoming. There's hope. We can come home. And Jeremiah in the Old Testament text also hits these facets and sort of encouraging people in exile. You've been dislocated. Babylon got you moving, right? The context changed. He then leads them to look inward at their identity in community. We might frame it like this. Externally, if you're far from home, you have the inability to be where you want to be. Physically, maybe this is your career. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's the timeline because of COVID. You're not where you want to be externally. But that has an effect, because the flip side of that coin is that internally, the inability to be where you want to be externally raises questions internally about things like presence and time and fear and anxiety and ambition and scary disempowering words like should. So if the external problem is that we are, we're far from home, we have the inability to be where we want to be physically, the internal call is the inability to be where we are, not where we want to be. So externally, we can't be where we want to be. Internally, that tension is the inability to be where we are. I'm not okay in myself, in my own skin. I can't be present to myself, to my time. I can't be present to my fear, to my anxiety and ambition. And then the communal call is based on the problem that we have the inability to be who we are with others, that we can't be our true self. And so all of these callings are callings to the true self, to be content where I am physically, to be content with who I am inside, to be okay being with myself, to be okay where I am, to be okay with myself, and to be myself with others. I mean, it sounds so simple when you summarize it like that, but these are all the things that are going on in this really old, simple story of calling students. And I like to say this, I came up with this recently, making students of love to love the world well, right? We don't love this language of disciples and Christianity. Tradition can bog us down. Jesus is calling disciples. He's making students of love to love the world well. Students of love to love the world well. So when Jesus says, I'm going to make you fish for people, he's connecting back to this hope, this deep hope in his tradition of an external and an internal homecoming. And an external and internal homecoming will bring together this communal homecoming. The world put right, our souls put right, integrated, well, aligned, harmony. The world put right, ourselves put right, and our communities connected, thriving. So leaving the expected path is the beginning, the call to adventure. Just like Jesus, the carpenter, he goes and he calls these fishermen from their boats. And it begs the question for us as we begin to reflect and turn internally, what is your expected path? I'm talking to you this morning, Mosaic, those of you who are watching at home, those of you who are following along later, listening in the car later this week. What is your expected path? Like, say you show up to a 10-year reunion, whatever it is, or in another 10 years. I know it's been more than your 10-year reunion. Say you show up to the next reunion, the next 10-year increment of college or whatever, and you say to this group of people who's known you for 40, 50 years, you say, I've been doing X, Y, Z, and they all go, yup, that's right. What's the expected path where you do that and no one bats an eye because that's exactly what they expect you to do? And I'm not, listen, no judgment. I just want to be aware and let's see what happens. Do you know what your expected path is? Have you ever thought about that? What's the path that everybody expects you to take? As a United Methodist pastor, some people think that the path of a clergy person is stepping stones to a bigger and better church, bigger and better salary, bigger and better institutional credibility, bigger and better name drops and book deals and blah, 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 blah. And in some sense, if I'm honest with myself, because I was in my late 20s when this started, Collective started as a departure for me and now has somehow become the expected path. Isn't that crazy how that happens? And again, it's not binary. I mean, let's just cultivate some sense of awareness of the external expected path. And who are the expectors, right? Who are the permission givers and the gatekeepers? Parents, bosses, kids, spouses, friends, colleagues. I mean, we're shaped. The TV, commercials, social media. They want you to walk a path. They want you to walk a path. And here's another, I'm not going to get into this a ton, but here's just another throw. This is great for your discernment. If somebody really, really has high expectations of you or clear expectations of you, it's always just valuable to take a step back and ask what's in it for them. What's in it for them? And I'll leave it with that. So Externally, physically, we leave. Something changes, something breaks, something adjusts, transitions. Richard Rohr, in his book Falling Upward, says this transition from the first half of life to the second half of life, he calls it falling upward. He says it only ever happens through great love and great loss. What he's talking about is an external change. Something changes. Physically, we leave, it breaks, it adjusts, the relationship ends, the career is over, something happens with the kid, not by our design, out of our control, something changes. Joseph Campbell says, almost without exception, chapter 1 is the call to adventure. You have to leave home to set out beyond your ordinary. Here's the gospel for you this morning. Here's the good news. The world has guaranteed in the last 18 months that you have set out beyond the ordinary. So the call to adventure has been taken care of for you. The context has changed. Things have exploded. Things are never going back to the way they were. John the Baptist left the priesthood and he went and had a mental health event in the woods. Jesus left the wood shop of his stepdad and took a walk by the sea. These fishermen leave the nets of their father and go follow an itinerant rabbi. And in the story, the external call is, come follow me, get moving. And this is the dominant story of the Christian tradition, an invitation to follow. But here's where the external call transitions to internal. When you think about what they leave, their nets and their father, which represent livelihood and family, they represent things like work identity and tribal identity, right? The cultural questions we ask at cocktail parties, what do you do? And culturally, what we mean is, who are you? Right? What you do for a living. The nets represent their work life, their vocational base, how they earn their living, how they feed their family, what makes you who you are. And then their tribal identity. This is nuclear, familial, daily relationships, meal partners who tell us who we are. Their father represents the home base of family, their day-to-day identity. So, work identity, what makes you who you are? Family identity, who tells you who you are? So the call to get unstuck is very often, it's a call to disconnect from some things that make us who we are. So externally, their feet walk away, but internally, they're opened up and haunted by a host of questions. What makes me who I am now? Who tells me who I am now? And even though 3 of the Gospels have them sort of externally follow, the much more mystical Gospel of John actually puts them face to face with these questions and anxieties. And that's kind of where I want to wrap up this morning. Jesus says, come follow me in the Gospel of John. But in the Gospel of John, they begin to follow. And then Jesus turns around and he asks them, what do you want? So in the other 3 Gospels, Jesus says, come follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. And they drop their nets and they follow. But in the Gospel of John, they start to follow Jesus. He turns around and he says, what do you want? What a great question. And they reply, where are you staying? We could take that as an external thing, like tell us on Google Maps the address, we'll come stay with you. We could take it as an internal thing, like that's a deeper question, like, Jesus, where is this thing going? Like, maybe they have the foresight to go, hey, are you going to go get executed in Jerusalem if you keep running your mouth politically? So like, where are we going physically? Where are you staying tonight? Where is this thing going? Like, where's this movement going to end up? Or even communally, maybe they're asking Jesus, like, is the place you're going, is there room for us? Right? Maybe they're asking Jesus, are you going or are we going? And what's going on in any case, what's happening is because they've left all these things, family identity, work identity, they're feeling far from home. Probably not physically because they just left and it's a small town. They're probably down the road at the Motel 8 or whatever. But internally, maybe these guys for the first time in their lives are from a small town. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they're not comfortable in their own skin because they don't know how to be where they are. Not because of their location. Maybe they're having a tough time for the first time in their lives. They're having a tough time being where they are because they don't know who they are. And Jesus asks this great piercing question, what do you want? Maybe following Jesus now is not just getting really good at knowing exactly what happened a couple thousand years ago, but knowing what's happening now in us. What are the ways in which I'm coming home? What are the ways in which I'm learning to live with what I want? Coming to terms with being okay with myself and in my own skin. I mean, in a sense, that's the practice of faith, is to live as if we're already home. Right? Faith at some level is just fake it till you make it. In fact, the main theologian of Wesleyan theology, John Wesley, he says, preach faith till you have it. Fake it till you make it. What if our faithfulness is simply to practice living as if we're already home? And here's where I want to leave you, because I think ultimately this is, this only helps if it helps you, if it helps us as a community to take a step individually so that we can take a step closer together. Which of these calls do you most need this morning? Which of these do you really need? Do you need something to get you moving this morning? Do you need something to get you turned inward and reflecting? Do you need a prompt to make a phone call or send a message and get connecting? Which of these do you need now? The last Sunday of September 2021, can you believe it, that this is where we are? And I think I want to leave you here. This is sort of the main departure for me in terms of getting unstuck and sort of a faithfulness to the true self and to the call within, rather than to like an external religious standard or institution or anything like that. I think the call ultimately we have to realize is not ever, and I get that we want this when we're young because we want certainty and satisfaction, we want the truth and we want to be right. I truly don't believe that the call has ever been from Jesus or any religion or the church, that the true call, and sure, people have manipulated and abused this, but I think the true call has never been, shut up and follow me. I don't think the call has ever been just like, sacrifice your desires, give it all up and just follow me and become just like me. I think the invitation to follow has always been an invitation to follow your own heart in. Right? I think what Jesus is saying, and I think what the gurus are saying, and the mystics and the saints, I think they're saying that in following them, what you're following is not every one of their specific behaviors, but you're following the path that they followed, which is a path inside. Not a path away from our desires, but a path into our desires. That's what Jesus asks the disciples, right? What do you want? And he doesn't say, good, I'm glad you've identified that so you can give it all up. That is the path, right? What if that's the path? Jesus says, come follow me. And they go, follow you where? What's the path? Give us the directions. What if the path is this? What do you want? And I'll give you 3 really simple tools to help you figure that out a little bit this week. Play around with an external call, with something that's getting you moving. Play around with an internal call, something that gets you reflecting. And play with your friends. Call somebody from Mosaic and say, hey, let's get together, let's grab a coffee. I want to talk to you about what's going on in me. I want to talk to you about the ways that I'm moving externally, internally, and connecting to our community. Mosaic, may we see our stuckness for what it is. An evolutionary invitation to get moving, to get reflecting, to get connecting. And I hope you believe it, because I believe it so deeply of you, that you can do this. That you can move, that you can reflect, that you can connect, and that you can follow a spiritual path, which is really your only true spiritual path, which is in. It's no one else's. No one else can do it for you. And I want to invite you in to that. I want to invite you to get unstuck from wherever you are and begin that journey and begin it together. Happy Sunday. Amen, Mosaic. Thanks again so much for having me. Grace and peace.